Welcome to Lady Justice, Women of the Court, a podcast hosted by Women State Supreme Court Justices and produced in partnership with the National Center for State Courts. In each episode, our hosts Justice Rhonda Wood of Arkansas and Justice Beth Walker of West Virginia discuss the law and its real-world implications for listeners of all ages. Join us for another insightful and inspiring conversation.
Welcome back to Lady Justice, Women of the Court, a podcast in partnership with the National Center for State Courts. I'm Justice Beth Walker of the Supreme Court of Appeals of West Virginia, and I'm so happy, as always, to be back with my friend Arkansas Justice Rhonda Wood. We are going to cover a topic today that I've been wanting to get into for a while, even though I don't feel very smart about it. We'll be more smart after this episode, I'm sure. Rhonda and I have proven over and over that we both love learning new things. So this one is perfect for that. But before we get into it and meet our guest, Rhonda, how are you? What's new in Arkansas?
I'm good. And it's great to be back and see you. And we are really busy this week. And I think I was talking to Beth earlier, but we are doing budget. We have our fiscal budget July 1st. So we are doing budget this week at the court. We have oral arguments Thursday. And we have our Children in the Courts conference, which is our big conference on child welfare, which I work with that with our courts. And so we do that this week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And somehow in there Friday, we are swearing in new attorneys that passed the bar in February. So I don't know, it'll be just a crazy week at the court. So anyway, but it'll be busy. How about you? How's the court? How's everything going?
It's good. We are ramping up for two big argument days this week, Tuesday and Wednesday. And then we have a little law day celebration on Wednesday afternoon, which we're going to do in person for the first time. We've been doing it virtually since it got started. So turns out everyone likes to come see our beautiful courtroom and our brand new learning center, which is very popular. So I'm excited about that, but all is well. It's, writing opinions, judging things. It's awesome. So with that, I am excited about today's topic, even though it's a little intimidating. And when I first imagined this episode, I thought we would call it something like Artificial Intelligence 101 or AI for Dummies. I'm not even sure if you could say that anymore, but something like that. And we could make a primer for lawyers and others who may not be paying attention to new technology or may be resistant to change or new things. But the really exciting thing about this topic, and it's also slightly frightening, is that AI, especially generative AI, has been developing at a lightning speed, even since we started talking about doing this topic. So what is considered new today will be considered old 3 months from now. It is all moving that quickly. And so with that sort of overwhelming, frightening, but cool backdrop, I'm so excited we have a true expert to kick off our discussion of artificial intelligence and the law. She's been on the forefront of this topic from the start. And as I've learned, is one of the few women in academia who have taken this on. So she is right in our focus area. Amy Cyphert is a lecturer in law at the West Virginia University College of Law and also the director of the Aspire office, which assists students who are applying for nationally competitive scholarships and fellowships. Amy is a Morgantown, West Virginia native and a 2001 graduate of Carnegie Mellon University, where she was awarded a Truman Scholarship. Amy graduated from Harvard Law School in 2005, so she's already smarter than me, which is awesome. She developed and teaches a course on artificial intelligence and the law, and her recent research has focused on generative artificial intelligence and its impact on the practice of law. She has also written about technology regulation and algorithmic decision-making in the criminal justice system. Amy and I have a wonderful bond, not just West Virginia and our ties to law school, but we are both Girl Scouts. And Amy is a current Girl Scout leader. So we have lots to talk about there too. Amy, welcome to Lady Justice. We're so glad you're here. Can you tell us how you got started in AI?
Absolutely. Justice Walker, thank you so much for that introduction and for inviting me. And Justice Wood, it's so excellent to be talking with you as well. Justice Walker, there is no world in which I am smarter than you. So I really appreciate the chance to come on and speak with you. And I think the story of how I got started in AI and the law is really actually a helpful lens through which to think about how more people should get involved, and especially more women involved in this field. I was really lucky in my first year of law school to have a torts professor. It was the fall of my 1L semester, and it was his first ever time teaching students, law students. And so we joked that it was the first time we took torts and the first time he taught torts. But because he was brand new and he was very young, this is Professor Jonathan Citrain, he used a lot of technology as the lens through which to teach torts because that was his field. He was a really brilliant person with a lot of a technology background. And so we learned about, is email spam access to chattel and all sorts of concepts in tort law that he taught through the lens of technology. And it really planted a seed for me. And what it taught me at the time was, hey, I have this interest and it actually is something you can learn. You don't have to start over and do a PhD in computer science to understand some of these concepts. And they are concepts that are going to come up again and again and again in the field of law. And so then when I graduated and had finished my clerkship and was practicing law in New York City, which is where I was initially a litigator, I also learned something that I think all litigators know, which is that there's a lot of things you can teach yourself when you have to. So, my first case that dealt with maybe oil and gas, or my first case that dealt with pharmaceuticals or something, I hadn't studied those topics in law school. I had to learn them. I had to come up to speed on them, and I had to teach myself them in order to serve my clients. And so then when I came to, back to WVU, to my hometown, which is such a wonderful place to be, and I found myself at the beginning of the, spring of 2020 in quarantine with my 3 small children who were then going to be doing remote pre-K and remote second grade. That was tricky. I thought, I really want to keep writing. It's important. And I started learning about GPT-3, which was the precursor to ChatGPT. And when I first learned about it, and I'm really lucky to have as my writing partner from time to time, my husband, who is also a cybersecurity researcher at Carnegie Mellon, and so was really, really brilliant. And I kept saying to him, this feels huge, and it feels like it's going to be huge for lawyers. And I really think this is going to change things for lawyers because writing is at the heart of what we do. It's what I teach my students, that you get to stand up and deliver oral argument occasionally, but you will always be writing in your life as a lawyer, and writing is such a skill. And I thought, my goodness, this is going to be huge. So I wrote a law review article about it. And as someone who was also taught professional responsibility, I was really interested in the ethics of using it in the practice of law. And then, it was kind of quiet. And people would say, what was that thing you wrote about? Was that acronym GPT something? But fast forward to the launch of ChatGPT, and suddenly my law review article was one of the only ones that had focused on GPTs at that time. And so then things really took off. And it was really great for me. So I guess to close the loop on my answer, Justice Walker, I got involved because I'm curious, and I had people who encouraged me and didn't let me have imposter syndrome. And I was confident enough to try. Because there were lots of times, and I'm always very clear, I don't have a technical background. People hear Carnegie Mellon and they think, oh, computer science, but no, I studied poetry. But we can all of us who are intelligent people, we can learn more. And this field needs us to, because it's big and it's impacting every part of not only our profession, but our entire nation and our entire world. And so we need smart people with lots of viewpoints to pull up a seat to the table. No one can afford to sit this one out.
So, I mean, Amy, I just have to say that there's so many things and so much that is fascinating about your answer, because it's such a great sort of lesson for everyone listening. And it doesn't even matter if they're interested in the law, because it's sort of that you can learn anything just by being inquisitive and by putting the time and the effort in to sort of say, hey, I want to learn about that area. And then you just put the time in. And I'm not going to let you get by, and I'm not going to let you undersell yourself. And you're very humble. And that's, but your articles are just outstanding. And so I read that first article that you wrote, that you were referencing, that first one. I've read several, but the 2021, which I think was the first one that you came out with, that Beth sent. And it was so well done, and especially considering that there weren't other articles really out there at the time. So it was so thoughtful. And but I think to help our listeners, because, you know, as lawyers, we throw around acronyms all the time and we don't really understand what they mean. And especially that is what people, maybe some of the fear getting into AI is that they don't understand it, and they don't understand what the words even mean. And it sounds intimidating when, if you put a little time in, it's not quite so much. So, you know, Beth mentioned, you know, maybe calling it AI 101 or AI. It's funny to say intelligence for dummies, artificial intelligence for dummies. But could we?
I think that's an oxymoron.
I know, that's what I was saying. Is
artificial intelligence for real dummies,
or maybe for real people, right? It's artificial for real, but to go through some of the basic terms and to maybe talk a little bit about the difference between we talk about broadly AI, but then there's generative AI, and maybe even talking a little bit about the difference between GBT and Chat GBT. There's some people explaining how that sort of transcended from one to the next, just so people get a little bit of the background for people that are completely unfamiliar. And we've already scared them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I always tell people is I think of my job as a professor largely as a translator. So the students have access to all of the materials. Why am I there? Well, I'm there to help translate complicated concepts into things that they can really easily grasp. And so I really think that's my job when I speak to judges and lawyers and others as well. And there's a bit of alphabet soup, and that can absolutely be intimidating. And I think sometimes there are folks who actually use the acronyms or they use the dense language intentionally because they don't want to stop and engage with other folks. So let's break everything down. AI, of course, is artificial intelligence, and it is a subfield of the field of study of computer science. And AI has been around for decades. So sometimes it feels like it's brand new, but it's actually been around for decades, since the 50s, the term. And there have been some really recent things that have allowed artificial intelligence to grow exponentially and to change. So what happened is, in the last decade or so, there have been big advances in a subfield of artificial intelligence known as machine learning. What is machine learning? At a really elemental level, if you think of artificial intelligence as the study of training a computer to do something we typically associate with humans, right? So training a computer to play chess, training a computer to drive a car. We think of those as typical human activities. So when we train a computer to do them, that's artificial intelligence. And if we think of traditional AI as being, we provide a step-by-step series of instructions. By the way, we call that an algorithm, or we call that a program, but it's just a recipe. If you've ever followed one, you know how it works. Step by step, you do this, then this, then this. So if we think of that as traditional artificial intelligence, the advantage of machine learning and the advance of machine learning is that instead of telling a computer exactly what to do, we were able to train a computer to learn from data we gave it. So we would give it this huge data training set. And that just means we would give it, if we were trying to do something with images, we would give it a whole lot of images that were coded by humans, or we would give it a whole lot of pieces of written data that were written by humans, right? And we asked the machine, notice things within this, notice relationships, notice patterns, notice things. And then based on that learning, which is the learning part of machine learning, Then when we give you new data that was outside of your data training set, apply that information to this new data. So we can think of machine learning, it does a lot with pattern recognition or other things like that. And the reason that it was able to really take off is we had huge advances in our computer processing power. So of course, the computer that used to fill up, half a room at the Pentagon is now in your pocket, right? So we had big advances and exponential advances. For those of you who are familiar with concepts like Moore's law, right? It would double, every 18 to 24 months, and that's huge. We're on the really high part of that growth curve. But we also had more data than we've ever had before, in part because we digitized a lot of things, but also in part because we all now create and shed so much data. So at some point, someone can take this podcast and they can feed it through an algorithm that will generate a transcript. And they can take that transcript and they can build a large language model. They can use that in other transcripts to build a large language model. And in fact, we know that podcasts are currently being used in that way. There's some great reporting out of the New York Times last week on that very topic. So that's machine learning. And then we have another big advance, generative AI. And generative AI, the big advance is now we're not just sort of recognizing a pattern. We're actually generating more. So for something like GPT-3, which is what I initially wrote about, ChatGPT, what does that alphabet soup stand for? The G stands for generative. So we can think of that as this is not just categorizing. This is not just classifying. This is actually creating something new that wasn't in the data training set. And I caveat words like creating a new. My philosophy friends would not like that I use that, but for now, let's just say that. The P comes from pre-trained because the data training sets that these tools are trained on are massive. Think scraping the entire internet. Think training on every book English language book we have, an English language source we have. And then the T stands for transformer architecture. This gets very complicated, but let me just leave it at this. I couldn't actually explain transformer architecture to you fully, but I can tell you this. Transformer architecture was this incredible advance that came out of labs associated with Google and other places where essentially human language, you can almost think of it as having this transformer architecture allows us to really notice connections and relationships between pieces of data that you and I might not even be able to see. But the machine is able to see these connections. And that really allows it to, among other things, create language that sounds like how humans write or sounds like how humans speak. And that's what was the big advance in the GPT systems that came out of OpenAI. And they've just been numbered largely sequentially. So there was GPT-1, and then there was GPT-2, and then there was GPT-3, and these are getting exponentially better, Justice Wood. So from the increase of utility from GPT-1 to GPT-2 was huge, and then GPT-2 to GPT-3 was massive, and then GPT-3 to GPT 3.5 or ChatGPT, another big one, and now we have GPT-4. I hear there may be a GPT-5 coming out soon, but that's all those are. They're just sequentially numbered and they're increasingly more powerful. They have increasingly larger data training sets. They are ever more kind of almost mind-blowing to see in practice.
So as with your first answer, there is a lot in there to follow up on. So following along, is a data set and a large language model kind of a similar thing? Are those two words similar, or are you using those differently?
So the data training set is what you would train a large language model on. So if you're trying, let's say we were going to build, this is actually something people would want to build, right? Let's say, Justice Walker, we were going to build a large language model and we wanted it to be able to produce things in the style of the Supreme Court of Appeals of West Virginia. For that, the data training set would be every written opinion that we could decide, do we want it to just be the current courts? Does that have a different style than the court of 50 years ago, right? So we would make some decisions about what's going to go into our data training set. What we need is we need the largest possible body of works we can have, because the way we currently do large language models, bigger is better. So they're more accurate, they sound better if they have more of a larger data training set, because it allows for more things called parameters, which we don't really need to get into. But the idea is we need as much data as we can possibly get. And the more data we have, the more likely we will be able to produce outputs that sound like what the court would produce. And so there, the data training set would be the opinions that have already been written, and the tool we would train on that would be called a large language model. And ChatGPT is an example of a large language model. We often call them LLMs. ChatGPT's release set off a real LLM arms race. So now we have LLMs from Meta and from Google and from OpenAI and from Anthropic and lots of them. And they all have funny names. I'm not really sure who's naming these, but they're pretty funny.
So is part of what I've sort of been reading, and I think some of what you've written on, the fear is, is that let's say that you were doing it, and so my law clerk fears that he's going to lose his job always because of this, right? And but you take, let's say, the West Virginia, Supreme Court of Appeals data set, but even you take their case law and their opinions, and then you create a large language model, LLM, off of that, and it's generating, but then it's becoming its own data set off what it's generated. So you sort of have like the original sort of true data set that were real sort of opinions by Beth and her colleagues. But then you have sort of the generated opinions or sort of data. But now you'll get to a point where it may be that it's 75% what was real and 25% that was generated, but that balance may shift and shift and shift, or you could have 75% what was generated and only 25% that was sort of Beth and her colleagues. And so now what you're generating in the future is more off what was sort of not authentic. I mean, is that what is sort of scary for the legal practice?
There are lots of things that are scary. What you're talking about, you actually honed in, Justice Wood, on a really fascinating technical problem. So it turns out there is a phenomenon known as AI cannibalism, right? These terms, they almost make you laugh. The idea is that there have been researchers who have shown that if you take a generative AI system, something like a large language model, and you try to train it on its own outputs. So let's say we've created LLM1, and now we're going to take LLM1 and we're going to retrain only using the outputs created by LLM1, none of what the justices actually wrote, just what the system wrote. Within several generations of the model, a phenomenon known as model collapse will happen, where it will break down and just start outputting gibberish. Because the idea is that you can't have too much synthetic data, that's data that's created by AI systems, because if you train on too much synthetic data, the systems break down. We don't fully understand yet why. There are different theories, and it's certainly something that a lot of the companies are working on fixing now through research, because as you know, Justice Wood, there is more and more synthetic data on the internet every single day. Every single day, there's a new series of news articles that were written by AI, or there are bots that are out there on social media putting lots and lots of sometimes scary misinformation, and it was generated by AI. So there is a fear that too much of this data can actually undercut the model's ability to do what they are designed to do. I think that for me, what really scares me too is this idea that it's actually really hard for humans to distinguish between an LLM output and something written by a human. So there was some research reported on in the MIT Technology Review, I think last summer, and the researchers had found that when it comes to spotting misinformation or disinformation, humans are more likely to believe it if it was generated by AI than if it was written by a human. So that's pretty scary. Not only can we not tell if something was written by AI, we're more likely to believe misinformation when it's generated by AI. And that's certainly a brave new world concept, and something that I think we have to think long and hard about how this is going to work for us.
Well, that answer about kind of cannibalism and how the system breaks down is really helpful, because it's sort of you can't just wait for this thing to generate everything. I mean, we're still going to have jobs, it sounds like, writing
Yeah.
opinions
I
and
tell my
writing
law
briefs.
students, right. I tell my law students, I don't think that this is replacing lawyers any more than moving into electronic discovery replaced lawyers. It shifted what lawyers do. There may be some, there will probably be some, honestly, job loss maybe among certain legal support professionals, or we may need fewer lawyers. But my guess is we will still have plenty of lawyers. They'll just be focused on other things. But this idea that we're going to stop writing as a profession, no. I mean, that's just wrong. And there's a lot of bad that would happen if we stop writing as a profession. And I worry a lot about how overuse of generative AI in the legal profession can actually stunt the development of law. I mean, you're both appellate law experts. So what do people bring to you? They don't generally bring to you the very easy cases that are clearly, decided by the application of black letter law. Those things very rarely appear in front of your courts. Often, what appears in front of you is a lawyer making a very creative argument about how law should develop or how law should change. I know that it can be uncomfortable to think that judges are sometimes making new law, but essentially at the highest courts, that sometimes happens because there's a gap that has to fill or there's some common law precedent that has to be updated. If we are using generative AI tools, and you both now already know they are defined by necessity, they are constrained by their data training set. They've only been trained on what has already come. I'm very skeptical about their ability to develop the next advance, to make the next argument for how law should evolve or change. And I think that is a real risk. We could really kind of codify law at this moment and stop the development or slow the development. And I really urge lawyers to make sure I'm fine with using these tools, to check your own writing or to help your own writing improve. But the ideas need to be yours. And you really need to be applying human judgment to your work.
And that leads me to ask about one more sort of term that you hear tossed around, and that is hallucinations. And, people kind of say, well, that's a hallucination. And tell us what that means, because I think it kind of relates to what you're talking about.
It absolutely does. And I think it's another one of those terms where it's not especially helpful and it doesn't necessarily describe itself. So an AI hallucination is simply when a generative AI system, like a large language model, produces as an output something that is made up, right? So something that is not part of its data training set. And pause for a minute and think about this. Remember that something like ChatGPT, that's not a legal AI system necessarily. That's a generative AI system. And so the ability to quote unquote make things up is both a feature and a bug because people use ChatGPT to create fiction. So it's not supposed to be necessarily constrained to only what is considered factual. But I also think it's important to remember what these tools are and what they are not. So people will say, well, why would it? Why would it make up those poor lawyers in New York? Why did ChatGPT make up those cases? Well, ChatGPT is not a research tool, right? It is not a research database. It is a generative AI tool. It is designed and has had reinforcement learning to sound like humans sound. It has no concept of true or false, and it's not trying to trick anyone. It's trying to sound like humans. And so if you ask it for legal cases about companies involving airlines, it knows some airlines and it can put things out there and it can say, this is probably how humans sound. Hallucinations, I don't want to oversimplify the technical reasons they exist, but I do think it's that those two things are important to remember. Number one, these aren't research tools, and so we shouldn't expect them to be. And number two, the ability to generate fictional things is part of their design. And so it's not necessarily always a bad thing that they hallucinate, but it is absolutely bad for lawyers if they are using them thinking that they are going to be real. And as you both know, many courts around the country have started considering or have already introduced standing orders, limiting people's ability to use generative AI, or more often, making sure that people realize you need to confirm these outputs yourself. I tell my students, think of generative AI as you would a very green paralegal, someone who was a great writer, but was really new to your office. And so you didn't know much about their research skills yet. So what would you do? You would look at their beautifully written brief. You wouldn't turn it into a judge. You would go through and you would check the citations. You would make sure they knew what they were talking about. And that's how people need to approach this. They need to remember we have that ethical duty to supervise all non-lawyer assistants, including AI.
I think that's a great example to use and to sort of showcase it. I will say that, and I don't know about West Virginia, but Arkansas did not make the 2012 change to Rule 5.3, changing it from assistance to assistance.
Wow.
Yes. And so we realized that when we developed our AI task force, and we were looking at some of the rule changes and seeing, what the landscape, and we realized that we did not incorporate some of those 2012 changes. So ours still is assistance. And so we not only need to change it to assistance, which that may be hard to clear to understand on a podcast, the words, but in
ANTS is what
ANTS versus,
which would suggest a person.
Yes.
Whereas the model rule, and I'm pretty sure what we have in West Virginia, is ANCE, which would include non-human assistance.
Right. And so thank you. Yeah, I was going to say sometimes it's hard to pick up the actual word when they're so similar. And so because of that, in Arkansas, it sort of does not, specifically say, though I think it's still implied, but we need to be clearer. So I think Arkansas needs to visit, and I think we're working on that right now, changing it to, but probably not just doing the model rule to 5.3 change from 2012, but going a little bit further, whether it's a change in the rule or the comments in the notes to talk about this technology further. But I think, explain it in terms of a green, brand new paralegal is a great way to do that. Beth, you guys have assistants, the CE.
Yes, I believe so. I'm not going to look it up while we're sitting here, but
Amy probably knows if she's teaching.
Yes, yeah. I could look it up, but I'm pretty sure we have A and CE.
Yeah.
So, but that brings up a really good point about. And this is a kind of philosophical conversation. Quick side note. I have an opportunity to sit on the AI rapid response team that CCJ, the Conference of Chief Justices, working with the National Center for State Courts, and putting together resources for courts about AI and model rules. Do you need a rule? Do you not need a rule? Is this any different than any other tool that would be developed for the law? A lot of is it the right thing for a judge to put out a standing order saying you have to disclose AI? Well, we didn't do that when Westlaw arrived or Lexis. You have to say you relied on Lexis and you didn't shepherdize with the books, which increasingly fewer of us remember doing, by the way. But so it's a great illustration of how, we're sort of proceeding with caution. But this technology is moving so quickly, we can't just sit back and wait forever, which is another reason we wanted to do this episode of the podcast, just to start highlighting how important these issues are.
I will say that, and the National Center for State Courts, which is
NSCS.
NCSG.
Or NCS,
yeah, G.org. But it has an AI site, and it has an interactive map of all the United States, and our state's task force has used it extensively. And like you said, Beth is on that national sort of team. But it is so helpful because you can go there and click on every state, and also they're encouraging states. So if you're from a state, they're encouraging states to send them, and they're uploading all the documents and what every state's doing. And so it's a tremendous one sort of stop shop to find what every state's doing. So, we can go around and see what every state's doing. And we've looked at West Virginia, I know, did a judicial ethics advisory opinion came out. So it's a great, I guess, while we're talking about the subject, kind of to mention that anyone who wants to know what's going on in all the states, it's a great place to sort of find all the resources in one place. But it's as good as your data, just like what we're talking about, right? So as many states as give it, send them their information, then they can keep it current. So
yeah, and I think it is. I think the idea that the model rules are largely up to the task, I largely agree with that. I think if you read most of them, they're going to be dealing with these issues. And Justice Walker's correct. We are ANCE in our West Virginia Rule 5.3, so we explicitly include non-human assistance. But I also think that it's really helpful. What you're doing today is so helpful. Some states actually are now mandating CLE for technology. So like some states mandate ethics CLE, there are now states that mandate technology CLE. And I think that can be helpful too, because are the model rules up to the task? Probably largely, but people don't understand enough about the technology to be able to think about how it interacts with the model rules. And so you really, I always try, I do as much speaking as I can here in West Virginia, and I go to as many state bar meetings or bar association meetings as I can, because I think it's really important to give lawyers an opportunity to educate themselves. I think lawyers are up to the task as well, but they need to know about hallucinations. They need to know about different phenomenon. And this will kind of blow your minds. How about this one? Is using generative AI plagiarism. And how do we think about plagiarism in the field of law? And it's very different for my law review article than it is for my student's final exam, than it is for a lawyer appearing in front of either of you. So I think we've got to have a conversation as a profession about those. We've got to make sure we've got the professional norms, and that we're being thoughtful about how we use the technology.
And we're hopeful that this podcast can be perhaps the start or kicking off of those conversations, in addition, of course, to the resources on the National Center for State Courts website about AI. We will put in the show notes links to Professor Cyphert's articles, which we've referenced already and are incredibly helpful. She, I think without the aid of AI, is generating quite a bit of scholarship on this. So working very hard. But that sort of brings up another issue that I wanted to highlight. We talked at the beginning about, any lawyer can learn this, and, you just need to jump in and, get involved in this technology in order to understand how you can use it in your practice. But we didn't sort of flesh out how you are one of the few women in academia talking about this. I mean, and the conferences that I've attended, which have not been a lot, all the speakers on this have been men. And I don't think that's because somebody said we don't want any women. I just don't think there are a lot of women in this subject area. So why is that? And what can we do about it?
It's a great question. I've attended many of those same conferences as you, Justice Walker, and I have found myself frequently in the last year the only woman on a panel, or something like that. I will say through my work, I have met some other amazing female researchers who are doing this, but you're right that it is still the exception, not the rule. And I had shared with you that I taught AI in the law this semester here, spring 2024, here at the WVU College of Law. And I have 23 students in the class, which is terrific. And it was probably the second or third day of class that I looked around the room and I literally gasped. And I said, there's only two. So there are 2 women and 21 men in that class, which is really pretty. I had thought because I was a female professor that maybe that would, but it's not unusual for that to be the case. So why is that? I mean, some of that is the pipeline problem of people who have, technology and computer science backgrounds are still disproportionately male, though a lot of universities, including my own, are doing a great job of producing incredible female computer scientists and engineers and data scientists and others. But I really think that there is a sense that you have to almost justify your interest, or that you have to explain that, here's where my credibility comes from. There's an amazing TED Talk by a woman, Dr. Rachel Thomas, called AI Needs All of Us. And it talks about how important it is for AI to have people who of all different gender backgrounds or all different racial backgrounds or from a variety of disciplines, right? That we need the philosophers and we need the historians as much as we need engineers and other folks, that these are all really valuable perspectives. And it is the type of thing where it's easy to feel uncomfortable and you have to, I think, sit in your own power in a sense. There are times where I find myself feeling a little imposter syndrome or feeling a little sheepish. And I just remind myself that I know what I know and I'm allowed to share what I know. And I don't say more than I know. I'm always very careful to say what I don't know. I think legal training helps with that. I don't know that, Your Honor, but I do know this, right? I'm good at that pivot when I need to. But it is something where I'm really hoping we're changing that. I really hope that the field is going to continue to have a broader inclusion of voices, whether that's people, people's backgrounds, their gender, their race, or their discipline, because it really is true. AI needs all of us. It impacts all of us, and we cannot cede it to a small group of people. One thing that I think it scares me is if you think about it, past advances in technology that have been really important for our society, right? So you think about, my favorite example is to think about the space race. So, you kind of think about who was doing the most impressive cutting edge research, and you automatically think of NASA, or you think of some of the incredible partnerships that NASA had with universities, right? That's where this incredible research was happening. But right now, AI research is coming out of for-profit companies. It is coming out of startups. It is coming out of the small group of private companies. And that's great. I'm so happy for them that they're having these incredible advances. But that makes me nervous because this is something that impacts all of us. This is something that is changing my life and will change my children's lives. And we don't have the government infrastructure and investment yet that I would like to see. I saw a study where researchers at Stanford had found that fewer than 1% of people who have a PhD in AI are going into government work. So, most of them are going into the private sector, and that's great because there can be incredible private-public partnerships, but I want to make sure that we're all pulled up to the table and we all get to help have a say in how things develop and what comes next.
Well, so I have a question leading sort of from that is, so besides having sort of your AI and the law sort of course, and it is startling if you only have 2 female because, most law schools are 50% plus females. So that is really sort of really drastically disproportionate with your class. But do you think that law schools have sort of now sort of a duty to figure out ways to incorporate usage of sort of the correct ways to use it? I think of it no different of when law schools initially had to, it was sort of a fight in academia, legal academia initially to say, are we going to teach them how to use sort of Westlaw and Lexis initially, right? There was pushback about that. And now we wouldn't even imagine not having law students coming out knowing how to use it. So in some respects, I still think core legal writing classes, first year should be, teaching, you have to learn the skill and you have to learn the analytics. But should we, teach the skill in higher, later years as part of that, ability to graduate?
I mean, for me, that's an easy yes. I'm sure my deans are probably going, whoa. But
what did she just say?
To me, absolutely. It is going to impact their practice from day one. And one thing I find from talking to my recent graduates is that whether or not you took my class, other people who are more senior in your organization expect you to understand technology because you're younger. So there's this expectation that the new grads will actually be the ones to lead us on these AI issues. And so I think it's really important for them to have the grounding and the background. Maybe they aren't even concerned about AI in their own practice, but they're going to represent companies who are going to have disputes brought about by AI, and they need to understand that. So to me, it's the type of thing where I don't know if it needs to be an entire course, but we now there are new things we train students on, like professional identity. And I think absolutely covering the idea of how AI impacts their practice and how they can stay informed and stay on top of things would be very important. And increasingly, more and more law schools offer these courses. I'm so proud that at WVU, we've taught AI in the law since 2020. So I'm really proud. We've been a national leader in that, and that makes me really proud.
Well, that is a great perspective on or a challenge maybe to some law schools who I know we have some listeners who are law professors and occasionally assign this for their classes to listen to, and maybe we can land on that map somehow too. But thank you for kind of issuing that challenge and explaining this. This has gone so quickly. I can't believe it. Amy, you are so good at explaining this in ways that people can, even lawyers and judges and appellate judges can understand. So we could go on and on, but we have to end eventually. And this is the time of our podcast that we call the lightning round. And we do this to give quick answers to a few questions that may or may not have anything to do with our work or today's topic. These questions were not generated by AI, although I always Google to try to come up with these because we're starting to run out of things to ask in the lightning round, and we're trying not to repeat. So we will answer these. We appreciate you, Amy, participating. We will answer these in this order: Rhonda, and then Amy, and then me. And question one will come right out of pop culture. Have you listened to Summer All of Taylor Swift's new album, The Tortured Poets Department? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Rhonda.
Oh boy. Beth, I'm in an election year. I don't want the Swifties to hate on me. So I listened to one song and that is as far as I got. So I'm going to leave it at that. Maybe that's implied. That's all I'm going to say.
Fair enough.
I live with a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old Swiftie. And so it has been on repeat in our house, at least the non-explicit versions. And so I have heard a whole lot of it.
Thumbs up or thumbs down? Or are you neutral?
I'm middle on this one. I think it's really interesting artistically, and I absolutely see what other people really like about it. But it's a little down for me. That's okay. Every artist gets to do their own thing. I respect her for doing her thing.
And so I am going to say that I have listened to it, the entire thing, more than once. This is all Bridget McCormick's fault. Our former podcast co-host, former Chief Justice Bridget McCormick of the Michigan Supreme Court, recommended on one of our podcasts that the Midnights album was really good. So I listened to it and launched myself into late stage Swiftiness at my age. So now so I am thumbs up. There are some songs that are a little morose, there's no question, but there's a bunch of songs that are really fun too. So I'm going to be a thumbs up on it. Next question. What word do you have a hard time pronouncing correctly?
So I couldn't just really go with one, Beth. I'm sorry. But here's my problem. I have problems in the legal world with, is it voir dire? Is it voir dire? Is it amicus brief? Is it amicus brief? Is it en banc and bank? Okay. Anybody wants to solve those? If Professor Amy wants to tell me, those are my pronunciation issues.
Well, I was going to go with certiorari, which I'm not sure I'm saying right. So I think Justice Wood and I are both, maybe we need some help with our Latin legal terms.
Yes.
Because I can't help you with those either, Justice Wood.
Well, of course, we've talked about this before. I'm in the state where we call it sine die, which is not correct, but we say it anyway. My difficult word that I've gotten a little better at is opioid. In the midst of campaigning during the opioid epidemic, I was so self-conscious of saying the word opioid correctly that I would stumble all over the place and I'd be on opioid. And I've gotten much better, but it is still kind of hard. So that's one of several words that I just have a hard time pronouncing. Okay, here's one, kind of relates to your response to our first question. Would your 12-year-old self think your present day self is cool? Rhonda.
I think so. I don't think I was a 12-year-old cool girl. I was a bookworm, sort of nerdy girl. And so I think that, yes, I would have thought someone who wrote for a living and, read all day was pretty cool.
Amy?
Well, let's see. I don't know that either of my 11, soon to be 12-year-old twins think I'm cool, but I think my 12-year-old self would probably think I was cool. But my 12-year-old self either wanted to be the first female president of the US or a makeup artist. So I don't know. She might be disappointed that we didn't land in either of those.
Well, like Rhonda, my 12-year-old self was pretty geeky. There was a lot of reading. There was a lot of Girl Scouts. There was a lot of all of that. And so I'd probably be okay. I decided I was going to be a lawyer when I was roughly 12 or 13 years old. So I guess I accomplished that goal. So I guess she would be okay with me. But she probably, I'm sure there would be some complaints. Okay. Question 4. What object, item, whatever, we won't get caught up on the term, do you misplace or lose the most? Rhonda.
My phone. It's always turned off, the sound, because I'm always in a conference or a Zoom or something. And then I leave it somewhere in the house and I can never find it. And I can't, have someone call it because it's off. The sound's off. So my husband, I drive him crazy looking for my phone. Yeah.
So same, I lose my phone constantly. And mine is also always set to silence. And so you can't call it, but you should know, Justice Wood, that you could have your husband do what my husband does, which is to find my iPhone alert. And then if you can program it so that even if your phone is set to silent, it will still beep if he does the alert. And so that's how I constantly find my iPhone.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's fascinating.
I'll send you directions later.
Okay, that'd be great. You've just been my lifeline. You've just made, my husband, it'll make him so happy.
I'll have my husband send your husband directions.
Perfect.
Wow, we are solving real world problems on this podcast.
I feel like that's something we need to put out on the pod. I feel like that's what maybe people care about more. That they'll be like, send me that.
Maybe we'll find a link to how to get your iPhone to beep when it's lost, even when it's on silent. If we can find an authoritative link, we will add it to the show notes.
Directions, we will include that.
Mine is not my phone. I somehow keep track of my phone. Okay. It's reading glasses. I am constantly leaving them on a restaurant table or, throwing them in my bag and then not being able to find them again. So I have solved that problem mostly by having so many pairs that I just leave them at each location and not take them from place to place. Fortunately, you can get sort of the drugstore reading glasses at a relatively reasonable rate. So that's mine. Well, that was fun. And that concludes another episode of Lady Justice, Women of the Court. We are so grateful to our wonderful guest, Professor Amy Cyphert of West Virginia University College of Law. Special thanks to our great friends at the National Center for State Courts for partnering with us on this podcast mission to educate and inform about how state courts work, how important they are, and to talk about the women who lead state courts. Rhonda and I will be back again soon with another episode. In the meantime, please follow us on social media and subscribe or follow Lady Justice using your favorite podcast app. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Lady Justice, Women of the Court. To learn more about the work of our nation's state courts, visit the National Center for State Courts online at ncsc.org. Follow Lady Justice, Women of the Court on social media and subscribe to the show on podcast platforms to receive notifications about new episodes.